There aren't many positive things to be said about Shadow Tower. There are lengthy loading times even in the menus, and several glitches when entering different sections. The game will freeze momentarily. Your character is incapable of running or moving quickly, and in order to attack an enemy, you must slowly angle your view, leaving yourself vulnerable to attack. Other problems include polygon tearing on the floors and the complete lack of music. Shadow Tower is a decent concept with awful execution. We recommend you avoid this one.
That is the full text of Electronic Gaming Monthly's review of Shadow Tower, released by FromSoftware for the original PlayStation in 1998 in Japan and 1999 in North America. In just 6 sentences, the author manages to pan just about every aspect of the game: clumsy combat, bad and glitchy graphics, bad flow through menus, and a complete lack of music. The EGM review wasn't an outlier. In the GameSpot review from the time, author Ike Sato says Shadow Tower is a blend of Kingsfield and more actiony RPGs like Diablo, a mix that only ends up bringing frustration rather than a sense of adventure. The most positive English language review of the game I can find from the time is Game Informer's 7.5 out of 10, and that review literally opens with the apologetic phrase, "Sure, we didn't give this game a mind-blowing score, but..." Shadow Tower did review better in Japan, but here in the West, it was seen as a disaster. This is not just a case of Western critics not being ready for FromSoftware's style. While the Kingsfield games that FromSoftware was best known for at the time never got outstanding reviews, they certainly did a lot better critically than Shadow Tower did. Kingsfield 2, for example, called just Kingsfield in the West, got an 8.3 out of 10 in EGM compared to Shadow Tower's 2 out of 10. The original Armored Core got a lot of 7s and 8s in the West. Even more obscure titles, for example Echo Knight, got scores generally in the 4 to 7 range. To this day, FromSoftware have never released another game that has reviewed as poorly on average in English-speaking publications as Shadow Tower did. Not Kuon, not Ninja Blade, not even The Adventures of Cookie and Cream. Here's the thing. Everything that the EGM review said about Shadow Tower is true. The visuals looked extremely dated even in 1999, and the lack of a soundtrack is disappointing. The load times are excruciating, and the game has its fair share of technical issues, most of all the game slowing to a crawl if more than one enemy is present at a time. In many ways, Shadow Tower is a bad game. And yet, there's something about Shadow Tower. This was the first of FromSoftware's classic titles I played, and I've had a soft spot for it ever since. I didn't beat it at the time, but every few years I've gotten an itch to return to the game, and have gotten a little bit further each time. While I think games like Kingsfield 2 and Kingsfield 4 are superior in many ways, there is just something about Shadow Tower that gives it a special appeal even among FromSoftware's classics. I love this game with all my heart. If everything that EGM review said was true, then why do I like Shadow Tower? Because behind the dated visuals and the janky combat, there is a lot to love here. There is something seductive about descending into the Shadow Tower. There are, in fact, recurring elements that everyone loves in modern FromSoftware games, which got their start right here. I'm not trying to convince you to play Shadow Tower. There is enough wrong with this game that I struggle to give a blanket recommendation of it to anyone. Instead, I want to tell you about this weird and relatively obscure game in FromSoftware's classic catalog, and why I keep finding myself drawn to it over and over again. FromSoftware have always made some of the weirdest, crunchiest, and most fascinating games on the market, and Shadow Tower is arguably the single most experimental game in their entire catalog, perhaps with the exception of Demon's Souls. Full spoilers for Shadow Tower ahead, and some spoilers for Demon's Souls, Dark Souls 1 through 3, Bloodborne, and Elden Ring ahead, but you've probably already played those. Join me as we descend into the underworld of the Shadow Tower. The first challenge you'll encounter in trying to play Shadow Tower in the modern age is figuring out what is even going on. The game does have a CG cutscene that plays at the menu, but it's mostly a tone setter without any narrative that's immediately obvious. Upon starting a new game, you'll be told the following in a text crawl. Deep in the forest, beside an ancient tower, there was once a town. Darkness swallowed all, and closed a gate. What is the meaning of these words? Darkness came again, and Zepta was devoured. A young warrior came to challenge darkness. If you're just playing the game, that's it. That's the entire setup. So, a few questions. Number 1, what is Zepta? Number 2, what? Number 3, huh? The reason this is so vague and confusing is because Shadow Tower comes from an era of gaming where your game experience wasn't expected to start at the new game option in the menu. The supplementary material, specifically the manual, was a part of the experience, and if you wanted to know how to play the game, much less understand what you're doing in it, then it was expected you'd begin with the manual. Shadow Tower is no different, and the manual opens with a 3-page written prologue explaining who you are, where you are, and what you're doing in the Shadow Tower. Unfortunately, if you're playing Shadow Tower in the modern era, you probably won't have access to that manual. Shadow Tower is a largely undocumented game, so tracking the manual down online is not as easy as you'd want it to be. Luckily, I found a PDF scan of it on a sketchy website that really wanted me to download their files, so let me read the prologue story to you. I am going to read the whole thing because we're going to want this information in order to understand what's going on. Playing Shadow Tower without reading this is the equivalent of trying to understand the story of Dark Souls without ever referring to the opening cutscene that sets up the mythology. The continent Eclipse. Here lies the holy land of Zepter. In this land is a sealed tower that is guarded by the kings of surrounding nations according to the traditions passed down from their ancestors. They whisper a prayer that the disaster will not repeat itself. It happened a long time ago. A tragedy descended upon the Kingdom of Eclipse, from which this continent drew its name. There was a crown with a single eye, that terrible gaze which snuffed out the Kingdom of Eclipse in one night, leaving nothing but a gargantuan hole. A fearsome power that led a prosperous king into total destruction. Always wearing that crown, the king looked smug. This crown is the course of our power. It is how we became the conqueror, so the king would say. That single eye that glowed so ominously before is now closed and quietly sealed within the tower. It was as if it had fallen into an eternal sleep. The secrets behind the ancient tragedy will never be known. The peace in the Holy Land of Zepter looked as though it would last forever, like it was forgotten that this was accursed soil. The number of mercenaries on the continent has recently increased. They claimed no nation and operated solely for their own gain, making their way by force. One of those men, Roose Hardy, set out on a journey in search of a new position. The town of Zepter was the crossroad of these nations, and there lived the gentle granny who tended the inn. She cared for him back when his career was just beginning. Guess I'll stop by Granny's for a meal. It has been a long time. Roose could see her stern yet kind smile in his mind. He did not know his parents. Hers was the first warmth he had experienced, and he had always drawn strength from that. But all that greeted Roose as he came through the woods in the dusk was a mound of rubble. There was no sign of anyone nearby. He caught his breath and looked up at the sky. The tower, always standing so proud, was not there. Only the base of the tower remained, looking lonely, as if the entire town had been sucked into the tower's depths. Roose, standing there in disbelief, sensed someone approaching and whirled around. Who is it? An old man dressed in a robe was standing there. I am the monk called to guard the tower through the generations. Judging from your longsword, you must be Wedden, Earl of Maris. How astute of you to discern the situation so quickly. Roose was about to tell him he had the wrong man, but the old man continued. The souls of those who lived here were consumed by those in the realm of evil beneath the tower. If their souls are brought back, they could possibly be saved, but my power is not enough to confront the evil ones. Several have gone down, but it is unlikely they will return alive. Man-made weapons are useless against them. Time is running out. In just a few days, the door to the darkness beneath the tower will be closed, and those whose souls were consumed will never be saved. There is no choice but to rely on you. You still have the choice to say no and walk away. And how can the souls be saved? The old man answered Roos's query. The souls that were consumed by the Dark Ones are now a part of their power. They can be released by conquering the Dark Ones who trapped the souls. The most important thing is to find the key to restore the souls to their original bodies, the one-eyed crown. Thereafter, you will be guided. This is a treasured sword passed down in my family through the generations. They say it is a Dark One's sword, but no one truly knows. Nevertheless, I am certain this sword will be your only hope. Take it with you. And with that, the old man gave him an age-old sword. You want me to go down that hole with just this sword? Roos stared down at the unlikely weapon, muttering. The Dark Ones spoken of by this monk, so powerful they cannot be conquered by man-made weapons. If I enter this hole, will I ever come back? Wouldn't it be better to tell him he has the wrong man and run away? But then, in his mind, he saw the granny's smile, and he could taste her good, simple cooking. Roos sighed softly and descended down into the hole beneath the tower. So that's just a touch more information than we started with from the opening crawl. I'm going to touch on some problems with the translation of Shadow Tower later on in this video, but for the most part, I am going to be taking the English translation at face value, except for places where I literally cannot. Because at the end of the day, that is the game I played, and the game that was released in the West. I bring this up now because you might have already caught an inconsistency in the translation. We'll talk about it in a later segment of this video. Now that we've read the manual, we have a real idea of what's going on. That young warrior we take the role of in the intro proper is Roos Hardy, a mercenary descending into the Shadow Tower, which is sunken into the underworld in order to save the stolen souls of the people who lived in Zepter, including his possibly adoptive grandmother. This explains several things about the game, the most immediately obvious being, if this is a tower, why are we starting at the top and descending? Well, because the tower and the Demon King within it have awakened, devoured the surrounding town, and sunken into the earth. We are starting on the highest floors because that is all that remains above the surface. This also explains one of the core mechanics of the game, the character progression system. In contrast to Kingsfield, which has a pretty traditional experience points and level up system, Shadow Tower has no character levels at all. Instead, each time you kill an enemy, you get some amount of SP, or soul points, which directly and immediately apply to your stats. It doesn't matter how you kill an enemy. This isn't Elder Scrolls where you get better at using swords by using your sword. You always get those points applied to whatever stat that enemy benefits. Narratively, then, this is because the monsters of the Shadow Tower have consumed the souls of Zepter, and by killing each monster, you are absorbing those souls back into yourself, hoping to use the one-eyed crown at the base of the tower to resurrect each of the souls you have absorbed within yourself at the end of the game. The more souls a creature absorbs, the more powerful it is. A slime at the top levels of the tower might only contain 1 or 2 souls within itself, while the powerful demon lords at the bottom of the tower might contain hundreds. I like how the story and gameplay work hand in hand here. Narratively, you are absorbing souls to become more powerful, and mechanically, you are gaining soul points, which raise your character stats. This SP system is, in my opinion, one of the most successful mechanics in Shadow Tower. Each and every time you kill an enemy, your stats go up just a little bit. The closest thing to this I can think of mechanically is the invisible effort value mechanic in the Pokemon series, where each Pokemon you defeat is worth a set number of effort value points for a given stat that's applied to Pokemon who participated in the battle. For every 4 points in that stat, your Pokemon's stats will increase by 1 over the course of levels 1 to 100. Even that is a more gradual and invisible method of distributing stats though. Here, these gains are immediate. It is very unique within the space of role-playing games even now. It naturally incentivizes you to kill every monster you come across and absorb every soul possible, which, narratively, is what Roos would want to do as well. It adds a narrative reason for Roos to be playing the game as a completionist. Occasionally, you'll find soul pods throughout the game, which will allow you to distribute some SP manually to whichever stat you want. These are among the most valuable treasures in the game, since they are one of the primary ways to skew your character build in a direction that supports your playstyle. The trick to SP is that it is a finite resource. In the menu, right from the beginning, you can see the number of SP you have collected, out of a possible 4,921 SP. That number, 4,921, is the maximum amount of SP possible if you defeat every enemy and collect every soul pod in the entire game. While enemies do respawn after you kill them, these respawns are finite. If you clear an area once and run back through it, it will be repopulated with enemies, but do that a second time and it might not be. When you're in the game's menu, if you hit the triangle button, you'll pull up another menu tracking your completion percentage for the game, including how many of the set location items you've found, how many of the game's currency, cunes, you've collected, and how many of the possible enemies you've killed. If you hit R1 in this menu, it will bring up a list of percentages, giving you an idea of exactly how close you are to fully clearing an area of enemies. While replaying Shadow Tower for this video, I started messing with retro achievements for the first time, which is a system built into most modern emulators like DuckStation. If you go to retroachievements.org, make an account, and then sign into that account through your emulator, then it'll actually track achievements made by the site for you as you play, even including pop-ups like you'd see on modern consoles. It's a neat novelty, and I'm impressed with how smoothly it works, but the reason I bring it up here is that it's actually really useful for playing Shadow Tower, because the set for this game contains 100% completion achievements for each area of the game, which is a little misleading because what it's actually tracking is whether you've killed every possible enemy and respawn in a given area. This is far from required, and trying to 100% the game and collect all 4,921 SP is not even remotely necessary, but it was nice to have a notification pop up when I'd completely depopulated an area and gotten all of the SP available there. Shadow Tower has a lot of stats for your character, and it's not immediately apparent what each of these stats does. Once again, looking at the manual, we can get more information. Strength increases your character's HP, and while the manual doesn't say this, it also governs your maximum equipment load. From my own testing, it seems you get 0.1 maximum carry weight per point of strength. Speed governs both your movement and attack speed. Defense is what you'd expect. It makes you take less physical damage from attacks. Balance says it affects attack resistance, which is very ambiguous. I'm assuming this is equivalent to the poise mechanic from modern FromSoftware titles, letting you finish your attack animations even if you take a hit during them. Slash, smash, and pierce determine how much of each type of physical damage you deal. Focus determines how much MP you have. Harmony, how fast you cast spells. Spirit, your defense against enemy magic. Purity says it affects recovery, which I think means how quickly status effects wear off, and Particle, Melting, and Soul are the magical damage type equivalents to Slash, Smash, and Pierce for physical damage. There are also special attributes, Fire, Ice, Poison, Acid, Holy, and Dark, which determine your affinity with attacks of each element. Of course, the other way of enhancing your character's power is through equipment. Weapons and armor don't just affect your attack and defense stats directly. Like games such as Diablo or many modern RPGs, every piece of gear is also a stat stick that raises your stats directly. Many pieces of equipment also have special effects, which for some reason you have to view in the Equip Info section of the menu instead of the regular Equip screen. I don't know why these two menus are separated, it's one of my biggest annoyances with the game. You'll spend a lot of time in the game's equipment screen because Shadow Tower is not just about collecting the best equipment possible and discarding what you're replacing. Unlike, say, Diablo, you're going to want to keep holding on to your old equipment where possible because of Shadow Tower's most oppressive and defining mechanic, durability. Shadow Tower is sometimes referred to as a survival horror game by fans. I don't fully agree, mostly because I don't find anything in Shadow Tower even remotely scary, but I can see where people are coming from when they describe it that way. I mean, Shadow Tower does have a far darker and even more realistic art style compared to the Kingsfield games that came before it, which basically look like first-person RuneScape. I still don't think this game is creepy enough to be a horror game, but it is mechanically taking inspiration from games like Resident Evil and Silent Hill, and reincorporating the defining elements of those games into a classic first-person dungeon crawler format. Back when I made a video about the indie horror RPG Fear and Hunger, I described it as a survival horror game largely because of how the game was built around resource management, which is in my opinion the defining characteristic of the survival horror genre. It's a genre built upon the feeling of always having limited resources and only ever having just enough resources to scrape through the next section of the game, never more than you need. It's about trade-offs and risk-rewards. Killing a zombie might keep your health higher, but it will deplete your ammo reserves. Running past that zombie saves ammo, but you risk getting grabbed and taking damage. When you feel like you are short on both precious healing items and precious ammo, that's a compelling choice to need to make. In a classic Resident Evil, the resources you're managing are health and ammo. In Fear and Hunger, it was body, mind, and hunger. In Shadow Tower, the resources you are managing are HP, MP, and item durability. The funny thing about the prologue in the manual is how heavily it focuses on Roos being given a magic sword that's the only thing which can harm the monsters within the Shadow Tower, because that sword you enter with will break within your first 30 minutes with the game. Kingsfield had weapon durability, but you didn't have to think about it that often. The weapons and armor in Shadow Tower degrade quickly. Your weapons and armor breaking is a concern during every single fight in the game. Killing a single room of enemies very well may take half of the durability of your weapons off, and if you're taking hits, your armor is going to be degrading just as fast. This is made up for by the number of weapon drops you're getting. Taking down that single room full of enemies may well halfway wear down your sword, but you'll also probably find another sword or dagger or axe in that same time. Drops from enemies are also randomized, including a lot of very powerful gear throughout the game, so you can get a drop that dramatically boosts your power level for the next few hours of the game and trivializes a difficult section, and on subsequent playthrough, there's no guarantee you'll get that same item. Plus, this mitigates the problem loot-based games like Diablo have, where 99% of drops are completely worthless vendor trash. Every weapon that drops in Shadow Tower is exciting, even if it's not very good, just because it expands your options. This emphasis on durability also forces you to play Shadow Tower without a super specific build, the SP system only allowing you to gently nudge your stats in a specific direction rather than go all in on one, and the durability requiring you to rely on every type of weapon and spell you can find because you need to use them as resources, which wouldn't work if the game had a traditional leveling system. These systems work really elegantly together since you're passively gaining stats across the board over the course of the game overall, and want to be able to use any type of random weapon that drops, naturally allowing you to become a jack of all trades without ever really thinking about it. Unfortunately, pretty much all of the gear you find around the tower will be mostly degraded by the time you find it. Gear doesn't seem to get less potent as the durability goes down, but of course if the gear actually hits 0 durability, you won't even be able to equip it anymore. As you traverse the tower, you will find shops, including one type of shop that lets you repair your weapons. What makes this interesting is that while there is a currency in Shadow Tower called Qun, you don't pay to repair weapons with that currency, you pay to repair weapons with your hit points. The more degraded your weapons become, the more it will cost to repair them, including a large spike in cost if you actually let something fully break. Don't let things fully break. Thankfully, whenever one of your pieces of equipped gear reaches 3 points of durability, you get a little icon with a red X on it on the side of your screen, notifying you that it's time to do some equipment maintenance, which is a quality of life feature that makes the game far more pleasant once you realize that's what it means. There's only one kind of healing potion available in all of Shadow Tower. You won't be finding greater healing potions or lesser healing potions. It's one size fits all, and a healing potion will always heal you up to full health. Because of this, you will find yourself playing what I like to call healing limbo very often throughout the game. Healing potions aren't super common, especially in the early game, and since they always heal you to full, the ideal way to avoid wasting resources would be to never heal until you're down to a single hit point. Obviously that's impractical, but if you've got 1000 max HP and you're only at 500 HP, you're not going to want to use that healing potion just yet, because using it now would only be a net gain of 500 HP, where you might be able to tank another hit from an enemy and restore 750 HP instead. Plus, if you know you're going to heal and you think you can make it to the nearest repair shop, you might just want to use all of those remaining HP as currency, fixing your items up until you're down to 25 HP, and using that same healing potion to heal a whopping 975 HP. This gamble is the thrill of playing Shadow Tower. Being in the middle of a level, unsure of whether monsters have respawned behind you, or if you've completely cleared that space, unsure of what exactly is coming up ahead of you, and having to decide whether you want to use a healing potion to top off now and be safe, or risk it all for bigger net gains. Once you get into it, Shadow Tower is not actually a very hard game, and it only gets easier the further into it you go. However, I have found myself on the wrong end of this risk-reward gamble more times than I'd care to admit, choosing to risk it all because I think I can make it through the next encounter with my current HP, carelessly taking a hit that lands harder than I thought it would, and then getting sent all the way back to my last save, losing 30 minutes or an hour of progress. This risk-reward loop is enhanced by two of the other shop types in the game. Only one type of shop in the game actually takes Qun and exchanges it for items. The other two shops we haven't talked about yet let you exchange your weapons and items for HP or MP potions, respectively. Each weapon and piece of armor you find can be exchanged for a single potion, if you so choose. This is another constant consideration. You reach one of these healing potion trade shops with 4 weapons in your inventory. Can you make it through the next area with only 3 weapons? Will you find more weapons on your way? Do you need that extra healing potion you could get for trading in your weakest weapon, or should you keep going without it? Plus, you can trade away broken weapons and armor for potions too, so whenever an item does wear down, you have to ask yourself if it's worth repairing at all. There's also a high-value treasure called Dorado's Ashes, which repairs a little bit of durability on everything you actively have equipped, which can often push you just far enough to reach the next save point or repair shop. The magic system in this game is also reliant on durability. Unlike Kingsfield or the Soulsborne games, you aren't learning and memorizing spells like you would in D&D, rather spells are tied to rings which allow you to cast specific spells. Casting these spells does use MP, but the actual bottleneck winds up being durability once again, as the rings have a limited number of casts before they break. If you find an HP and MP shop next to each other, should you trade an old item in for an MP potion, or would that even help you? Maybe you'll find yourself with plenty of MP, but no intact rings that let you cast magic. But of course, there's no use keeping your rings repaired without MP to use them, and MP potions are far rarer than healing potions are, so trading in an item for an MP potion instead of an HP potion is arguably a better value. Magic is extremely powerful and almost required for the late game areas, but it winds up being highly limited. I love this. I love all of these interlocking systems that are applying constant stress and constant pressure to the player. This is what I live for in games. These seemingly disparate systems that actually connect together in a clever way. You turn equipment into health, and health into durability, and then use that durability to kill more enemies and get more equipment as you sink further and further into the bowels of the tower. This gameplay loop is addictive, stressful, and exhilarating. The economy winds up being the scariest part of the game. How many other games can you realistically say that about? Every time I traded in a weapon I'd been using just an hour earlier, I felt a wriggling uncertainty, a fear that I was making a mistake and I'd find myself without something I needed during a boss fight or a difficult stretch of the game later on. That never happened. Shadow Tower isn't actually as hard as it seems, but that's a trick which the survival horror games Shadow Tower is taking inspiration from pull on the player all the time. The Resident Evil games do always give the player the resources they need, but they never give the player more resources than they need, which makes you constantly worry about running out. That's where the joy in those games lies mechanically, and it's where the joy of Shadow Tower lies too. Between the unique character progression system and the equipment to health to durability to equipment loop of the game, there's nothing quite like Shadow Tower. It has a very distinct feel even from contemporary titles like Kingsfield. Of course, all of this is a meta layer of gameplay. These are big picture considerations, not the moment-to-moment experience of playing the game. It's the moment-to-moment combat where the game is going to lose most players. If you've played a Kingsfield game before, Shadow Tower is going to feel very similar. If you haven't, then the first thing you need to know about these old-school FromSoftware dungeon crawlers is that they are slow. Shadow Tower is the slowest of them all. You move at a snail's pace, and you turn even more slowly. Kingsfield had a sprint button, but no such option exists here, and the game is literally running at a lower frame rate than the Kingsfield games were, 15 FPS instead of 20, and you're going to notice that 25% difference. And that's when the game is running correctly. As noted in the AGM review, the game often chugs, freezing as you enter a new area, or struggling to keep up when multiple enemies are on screen at once. I haven't played Kingsfield 1 or 3, but compared to the other retro FromSoftware games I have played, I think Shadow Tower feels noticeably worse in the hands. These games operate with first-person tank controls. You use the D-pad to move, with the up and down buttons moving you forward and backwards, and the left and right buttons turning you left and right. Slowly. Very slowly. These games are three-dimensional, but they do not support analog controls, so to look up and down, you have to press the R2 and L2 buttons respectively. R1 and L1 let you strafe right and left, which you'll find yourself doing quite often during combat. You hit triangle to attack, square to block, circle plus triangle or circle plus square to cast your two equipped spells, and X plus triangle or X plus square to switch between your equipped and reserve weapons and shields. The defining feature of combat in this game is shared with Kingsfield, how the game handles stamina. Below your health, you have a stamina bar, and whenever you attack, that bar will fully deplete and then begin to refill. You can attack again as soon as you'd like once your previous attack animation is complete, but the less energy is in the bar when you do attack, the less damage your attack will do, meaning you really want to let your stamina fully refill if at all possible. Kingsfield controls are an acquired taste. For many, the way these games feel in the hands is a complete deal breaker. I get it, and I would never tell anyone they're wrong for bouncing off the games for that reason. It's not just a matter of the game being old and outdated. In 1994, when the original Kingsfield was released, the controls were more acceptable, but FromSoftware stuck with this control scheme all the way through Kingsfield 4 in 2001. The slow pace and janky controls are not even what an audience from 1999 had come to expect. Even if we look a year earlier, the year Shadow Tower released in Japan, its first-person contemporaries were Half-Life, Thief, or if you think PC games are an unfair comparison and want to look to consoles, Turok 2, heck, the year before Shadow Tower released, we got GoldenEye and Doom 64. We had not totally figured out first-person controls on console by 1998, but the way Shadow Tower controls, and especially the pace it moves at, is not actually just a matter of it being dated. It felt weird at the time. However, I do not think the controls of Shadow Tower, or for that matter Kingsfield, are bad. They work in context perfectly fine. The game is balanced around them. You have to learn them, and that is a big uphill battle that many people will rightfully have no interest in. However, Throughout every classic From Software dungeon crawler I have played, once I've managed to rewire my brain to the way these games function, I have a lot of fun with them. My problem with Shadow Tower's combat specifically is more the speed of the game rather than the control scheme itself. In many ways, the combat in all of these retro FromSoft dungeon crawlers is very similar to the combat of FromSoftware's later output. You are still learning spacing between yourself and the enemy. You are still learning animations and exactly how to dodge a given attack, and where your openings are to land a blow without taking a hit. However, there's no dodge roll, and the movement of both your character and all of the enemies is glacial in comparison to those games, or pretty much any game, which is where the combat suffers. In that EGM review, the author complained that in order to attack, you must slowly angle your view, leaving yourself open to attack. But that's the thing. Part of the combat in this game is angling your camera while you're moving, out of range of the enemy, and knowing when you have a chance to leave yourself open to attack by attacking, because you recognize that the enemy is going to be vulnerable long enough that you're safe to take that risk and land a blow. You simply cannot walk up to an enemy and button mash your way through Shadow Tower, in the same way you simply cannot walk up to an enemy and button mash your way through Bloodborne. That is a way to guarantee you will die over and over and over again. Once you have magic, you can learn exactly how long it will take for your stamina bar to refill, and when you need to weave spells in between your attacks to keep an enemy stun-locked. Yes, I prefer the combat of Dark Souls or Bloodborne to the combat of these games, but there's still a deceptive amount going on with the combat of these games, and they still have that feeling of getting good at combat which initially seems unforgiving, until eventually you can kill bosses without ever getting hit. It is still satisfying here, even if it's happening at a glacial pace. I'm not here to convince you that it's worth putting in the effort to learn how these classic FromSoft games control, only to tell you that once you do learn how to control them, there is a lot of fun to be had. If Shadow Tower moved like 30% faster, I think I'd actually be comfortable calling the combat good once you learn it. It's just a little bit too slow here. Now that we've talked about the controls and mechanics of the game, let's talk about the experience, the descent into the Shadow Tower itself. You begin Shadow Tower on some stairs which lead down into the first of the game's levels, the human world. Between each world, there are these sections with stairs leading from one floor of the Shadow Tower to the next. The very first enemies you encounter in Shadow Tower are, as in many RPGs, slimes. Sadly, the game makes a bad first impression because I think slimes in Shadow Tower are the most frustrating enemies to fight in the entire game, because they are so low to the ground that unless you're practically on top of them and angled perfectly, you likely won't be able to reach them with your short sword. Like a survival horror game, when you see an enemy you aren't equipped to fight, it's often worth ignoring them entirely. The slimes are annoying to fight, but they're also slow and easy to avoid, so this is the lesson you should actually take from this initial encounter. Different weapons do have different reach, so you're better off coming back with a longer weapon or even a ranged weapon to take these out easily. Initially, it seems like there are one-way drop-downs in this game that prevent backtracking, but this is actually one interconnected world with shortcuts leading back to earlier areas, and you can backtrack all the way from the final area of the game to the beginning if you want to. In addition to this, once you've cleared the game, you can load your cleared data, and the game will put you at the top of the tower with all of your equipment. This isn't a proper New Game Plus mode, because your world state will be persistent with everything you've already done. It's just an easy way to go back through the game to look for secrets and 100% it if you'd like to. My single favorite thing about Shadow Tower is also the thing that keeps me from really considering it a survival horror game. Shadow Tower is the single goofiest game that FromSoftware have ever made, maybe with the exception of Cookie and Cream, which I haven't played. This is one of my favorite sets of monsters in the history of video games, and even better, there's a bestiary where you can view everything you've come across. For example, let me introduce you to Skull Slime, Tree, Tongue Imp, Barrel Snail, Plant with Arms, Plant with Beak, a Building, Egg, Worm Face, Brain Slime, Face, Guardian Ape Phase 2, Triceratops Warrior, Plucked Chicken, Minotaur Lamia, and Mollusk Face. I cannot stress this enough. If you like looking at messed up little guys, then you absolutely must play Shadow Tower. If you're the kind of person who saw the giant pinball in Elden Ring, or the mushroom dads in Dark Souls, or the walking nervous system centipede in Bloodborne, and nodded your head approvingly, then Shadow Tower's lineup of monsters is going to be right up your alley. It's not just the monster designs that make this game so goofy either. Surprisingly, in contrast even to later FromSoftware games like Kingsfield 4, Shadow Tower is fully voice acted. The voice acting comes from an era where casting was determined by who was in the building right now, which means the voice acting is magnificent.
Oh, the only water in this tower is in Waterworld. Oh, it's actually acid though. Be careful or you'll get yourself melted. Oh, very bad.
I miss this. This little guy, by the way, is named Fat Mole. He's one of 2 NPCs in the game who have something resembling the NPC questlines of the Soulsborne games, and Fat Mole is specifically the most important NPC in the game. I'm not kidding. In this house, we love Fat Mole. The goofiness of this game may well not be for you. It may be something that puts you off of the game in a major way, but for me, it is the best thing about the entire experience. There are 150 different creatures in this game, and they only get sillier the further into the game you get. One of the things that makes Shadow Tower compelling are the weird interactions within the game. For example, the core mechanic of Waterworld is acid. The water within the tower has all turned into a highly corrosive acid, which not only hurts you when you touch it, but wears down your equipment super quickly. Given how essential durability management is, the trick to this level when, say, you have to dive through a pool of acid is to simply unequip all of your gear, make it through the acid, and then put everything back on. Throughout the level, though, there are also many moments where you have to wade through pools of ankle-deep acid in order to progress. A semi-rare item called Acid Vaccine will help you mitigate the damage from standing in it, but since there are many fights in these sections, taking off all of your gear isn't really a viable option. Thankfully, you don't need to take off all of your gear, since the acid is only ankle deep. Only your boots will be worn down by standing in it, and you can definitely make do without your boots equipped for a few levels. It's an almost immersive sim-like solution in a game from 1998 that is definitely not in the immersive sim genre, which I find impressive. Then there are just weird moments that stick in your memory, like your confrontation with the dragon Abraxas. Abraxas is fittingly found in the Fire World, and just before you walk into his room, Fat Mole will show up and tell you that you don't stand a chance against him. Continuing forward, you'll find Abraxas peeking his head and neck out from the center of a huge pool of lava. He'll yell at you for a moment and then start shooting flame breath at you. As is, you don't stand a chance against Abraxas. You can't even reach him, so it's time to backtrack. Fat Mole will now let you into a section of the level you couldn't reach earlier, full of quelags, but if you make it all the way to the end of this section, you can find a chain that when pulled will turn the flow of lava off. Wait a moment, and the lava flow will cool, allowing you access to new parts of the level. When you return to Abraxas, you'll not only find the lava pool he was sitting in cooled to hard stone you can walk on, but you'll find him fossilized and dead. Another interesting puzzle boss is King Edward, a late-game boss found in Death World. We'll talk about King Edward's lore later on, but suffice to say, you're finding remnants of King Edward's expedition into the tower throughout the entire game, and when you finally find him, he's a skeleton king who has shed his flesh to become immortal. Indeed, no matter how long you fight him, you can't kill him through combat alone. Behind some hidden walls nearby, you can find the truth. Edward isn't just a skeleton, he seems to have fused his flesh with the tower itself, with fleshy tentacles and eyes gooping out of the walls to protect a large beating heart weaved into the stonework surrounding it. Kill the heart, what truly remains of King Edward, and his skeletal form vanishes. Of course, Shadow Tower has plenty of traditional boss fights too, but these weird puzzle bosses like Abraxas and King Edward break up the pace of the game a bit and end up being some of the most memorable moments in the game. From Software are still the best in the business at weird interactions like this, whether it's the ritualist you have to kill to keep the fool's idol from reviving, knocking Ceaseless Discharge off of a cliff, or emoting at the Brain of Mensis until your arms get tired and you happen to shift to the correct position for communication. These weird little details, both hidden and not, are some of the best things about the Soulsborne games. We've been getting less and less of these moments with each game From Software releases, as the fandom have told From Software over and over again that what they really care about are technically demanding duel fights against sad knights. I love a technically demanding duel fight against a sad knight, but I also love these weirder parts of From Software's games, and Shadow Tower contains a lot of them. Some of these interactions are admittedly obtuse enough that if you are going to play Shadow Tower, you might want to keep a walkthrough tabbed just in case. For example, one of the areas of the monster world is full of invisible enemies. The only way you can make these enemies visible is to find a secret item in a hidden room behind a false wall in another region of the world. Kill the enemies in the secret room until you deplete their respawns, and a giant mini-boss version appears. Kill that mini-boss to get a young dragon gem, which only says that it cures blindness, and then realize you need to place the gem on a pedestal to make those enemies visible. I love these weird and obscure interactions, but if you get stuck, I recommend this walkthrough available on GameFAQs by the legendary David Bunch. If you've played Kingsfield 4, you might recognize him from Shop by David Bunch. The Shadow Tower is split into 7 worlds, really floors of the tower, each with a different theme and gameplay gimmick. You begin in the human world, which is the most straightforward, filled with crypts and graveyards and prisons. Beyond that is the Earth world, with a heavy emphasis on poison, full of strange plant monsters and dwarves. Then we have the Fire world, full of strange automatons, fire elementals, and dangerous traps you have to find a way to disarm, like a Proto-Sens fortress or Iron Keep. In contrast to that is the Water world, which is largely focused on the acid mechanic I already explained. Then we have the Illusion world, which is the most obviously maze-like level of the game, constantly trying to disorient and confuse the player. Next is the Monster world, which also seems to sometimes be called the Beast world by players for reasons I can't quite figure out. This contains the strangest and most dangerous monsters in the game. Last but not least is Death World, lying in the very depths of the tower, a last bastion of defense against invaders who seek the One-Eyed Crown. Each of these worlds are then split into several themed sub-areas. For example, the human world is divided into the Solitary region, the crypt where you begin, the Hidden region, which is a torture chamber, the Forgotten region, which is a prison, and the Cursed region, which is a cave system. One of the strongest aspects of Shadow Tower are these distinct worlds. NPCs in Shadow Tower are few and far between. There are really only 2 characters who have what I would call quest lines, in the way you might think of them from more modern games like Dark Souls. Despite that, the game does a very good job of giving each world a unique feel and personality. The top floor, the human world, is, as I mentioned before, largely crypts and graveyards. The reason for this, presented by text scrawled upon a wall, is that most who enter the tower do not even make it past the earliest floors, and wind up dead and entombed right where they fell. It's hard to say that each of the other worlds feel like they have their own culture or society, since most of the inhabitants we see in areas like the Earth world, Water world, and Monster world seem too bestial to be responsible for the distinct architecture we see there. The mines of the Earth world are plausibly created by the hostile dwarves there, but the Water world and Monster world are harder to ascribe real intention to. What these worlds do have, though, is an ecology. These worlds feel like unique biomes that have sprung up within the Shadow Tower itself. There is a level of abstraction here because it's a PSX game, but I think it overall sells the illusion well enough. This is a really cool idea, that the Shadow Tower is large enough and wide enough for each floor of it to contain an entire ecosystem wholly separate from the next. I've seen similar ideas in other media, so I'm not saying it's completely unique, but it is cool. On the other hand, there's a fine line between a game's environments being abstract and being anonymous. While I think as a whole each of Shadow Tower's worlds sell their unique characteristics and personalities, the individual environments are often too close to the anonymous side of things. Many rooms are large and empty, and it can be hard to tell which room you're in between several that look almost identical. The experience of wandering, trying to figure out where you are and where you're going, is a lot of the experience of Shadow Tower. There's a lot of walking through empty rooms in the game, especially in the second half, with the illusion area being the most guilty of this. If you overlooked a single hallway or, God forbid, hidden door, you can lose a lot of time just trying to figure out where you're going. More than once, I found myself relying on the tried and true method of navigating a maze, sticking to the wall until I had found my way through. There is a very specific loneliness to all of FromSoft's classic dungeon crawlers, but Shadow Tower most of all. This might be a weird comparison, but these games have always reminded me of playing Metroid Prime in a weird way. These games aren't exactly Metroidvanias, and Metroid Prime is of course a much faster paced game, but there's a shared loneliness to them. That feeling of wandering through empty ruins, fighting monsters as you explore, accompanied only by your footsteps and the soundtrack. Speaking of the soundtrack, for Shadow Tower, there isn't one, and that's a huge problem. Where the goofiness of the game is my favorite thing about it, the sound design is my least favorite thing about it. There's music on the opening menu screen, the attract mode, that opening text crawl, and in the end credits, and that's it. For 99.9% of this game, you hear nothing but your footsteps and the growls of nearby monsters. I sometimes see this decision portrayed as being done to enhance the horror atmosphere of the game, but I don't agree at all. The lack of a soundtrack doesn't enhance the tension of the game, it diminishes it. Look at the classic horror games which Shadow Tower is taking inspiration from. Would the atmosphere of Resident Evil be better without the save room theme? Would Silent Hill be half as good without Akira Yamaoka's score? The sound design outside of music isn't good enough to pull off this silence either. There's not much in the way of ambient sound echoing through the dungeon. You get some wind noises in the central stairwell of the tower, but generally it's either the sounds which you make or the sounds which monsters make. No creaks and clicks and crackles emitted by the dungeon itself, and consequently, you never have that moment of faintly hearing something and wondering if it's a monster or just your imagination, which is so key to tension. If you hear something, it's either you, an enemy, or a trap, because those are the only things which make noise in this game. It can make the game feel empty and lifeless at times. It's also a bummer because the Kingsfield games all have soundtracks. Great soundtracks. Kingsfield 4's soundtrack is so great, I often use it as background music for my videos when I don't know what else to use, just because it's one of the best game soundtracks of all time. I'll probably use the Kingsfield 4 soundtrack in the background of this video, since I don't have any Shadow Tower music to use. The music in the Kingsfield series is part of what gives it that tense atmosphere, that constant sense of exploration and adventure, which makes it so captivating. I'm not saying every moment with the game needed to be set to music. For example, in modern FromSoft games, most of your time exploring is silent, and the boss fights have these grand operatic scores. That works, that does manage to highlight the loneliness of exploration, but still gets your blood pumping at the climactic moments where it needs to. The complete lack of music in Shadow Tower is a massive negative, and in my opinion, it ruins the atmosphere more often than not. This is the thing I most agree with all of those hyper-negative reviews from back in the day about. This was a failed experiment, and a missed opportunity, and I think FromSoftware recognized that because they never repeated this mistake. Figuring out where you're going is half the battle in Shadow Tower. Getting lost is part of the experience. Like modern FromSoft games, these older dungeon crawlers are very much about creating your own maps, either in your head or with pen and paper if you're nasty. This is necessary from the very first level of Shadow Tower because it is arranged into a giant circle. If you're following what seems like it would be the critical path, eventually you'll end up back near the beginning of the game behind a false wall. If you notice a warp stone taking you to the Forgotten region and follow the most obvious path, you'll end up back in the Cursed region, and eventually you'll end up on the wrong end of a one-way drop back in the Solitary region where you began. The actual critical path is a drop down in the Forgotten region that leads out into the tower and down to the Earthworld. The Cursed region is entirely optional. Shadow Tower is very much in the classic maze game style of level design. Figuring out what the critical path actually is will often be the real battle, which is why I say there's no shame in keeping our good friend David Bunch's walkthrough tabbed while you're playing it, in case you get stuck. I do strongly recommend only using the guide if you get truly stuck though, because a lot of the fun of this game is mapping these spaces yourself. The lack of a map in this game, and in Kingsfield, and in Dark Souls, is not accidental. It is a deliberate choice that adds to the experience. The game appears very linear at first, but it opens up more than you might realize relatively early. If you want to beeline the entrance to the Void where the final boss is found, you can do that extremely quickly. Not only are most of the areas in the Fire World and Water World off of the critical path, but if you're up for doing some dangerous falls in the stairwell areas between worlds, you can reach the Void without touching the Fire World, Illusion World, Monster World, and Death World at all. Basically, as soon as you've reached the False Pit Cavern, the final major region of the Earthworld, the entire rest of the game is now open to you if you know where to go. When you reach the door to the Void at the end of the game, there is a door checking how many of the world's final bosses you have killed. I assume this is the gate that will soon be sealed permanently, mentioned in the prologue. Unless you've killed all of them, the door will simply kick you back out and you'll have to keep exploring. There's no dialogue or anything telling you this is what it's checking for, but there are large eye-shaped gems in the door which fill in when you've beaten each boss, which is how you would check for this. So the game is deceptively open, but none of this content can be outright skipped. Whenever I make a video about a game, I tend to end up playing through the game at least 2 or 3 times, mostly just to sate my own curiosity about how things would play out if I'd played it differently. For one of my playthroughs of Shadow Tower, I decided to beeline as late into the game as I possibly could as quickly as possible to see how viable sequence breaking and playing the later areas as an underpowered character actually is. I managed to make it all the way to the gate to the Void at the end of the game with under 1000 total SP, and can report back that yes, you can fight and win against even late game bosses like Necron with the equipment and experience you'll have just from clearing out Earthworld. This is for the same reasons Soul Level 1 runs of Dark Souls are possible. Equipment is more important than raw power level, and if you're good, you can just avoid getting hit and can slowly whittle down any enemy in the game. As I said before, the combat in the retro FromSoft dungeon crawlers is a lot slower, but all of the core concepts of the combat in those modern games still apply. Spacing, animation priority, memorizing enemy movesets, recognizing your openings to attack. Shadow Tower is a much easier game than FromSoftware's modern output, so once you've beaten the game once and know what you're doing, it's honestly easier than you'd expect to fight endgame enemies well underleveled. There are some advantages to sequence breaking the game and going to the later areas early. Enemies deeper in the tower are also worth more SP than ones on the higher floors, so you'll level more quickly and be able to blow through earlier areas with ease. You'll also be getting more powerful equipment drops the deeper in the game you are, letting you jump the power curve if you find a specific area, like the Fire World for example, too difficult early on and want some extra gear and stats before returning to it. Shadow Tower has what I like to call a reverse difficulty curve, which is to say, the further you get into the game, generally speaking, the easier it becomes. The most difficult sections of Shadow Tower are honestly the human world and the earth world, just because your resources are so limited that early on. If you're playing the levels in the order you come across them, then by the time you reach the Monster World and Death World, they'll feel like a breeze in comparison to the earlier areas, so it's actually a pretty interesting experience to sequence break like this and feel what those sections would be like if you were earlier on in the power curve. Have you ever fought Pinwheel as your first boss after the Asylum? Same vibe. Being able to tackle most of the game out of order also makes replays feel a lot more compelling, even if you do still need to clear all of the areas by the end of the game. Generally, if it's your first playthrough though, I'd recommend just going through the worlds in the order you reach them, maybe with the exception of venturing into the first area of the water world a bit early to get some fire resistance items, and access to an unlimited healing pool that you can use in a pinch. Without a doubt, the weirdest feature of Shadow Tower is the game's PvP mode. In the main menu, there are 3 options: Load Game, New Game, and Versus. Including some sort of multiplayer mode is not the strangest thing in the world, but none of the Kingsfield games had any such mode. As far as I know, none of FromSoftware's future titles have used this exact idea again since, which is a bit unfortunate because the PvP mode for Shadow Tower is honestly a blast. I imagine that I'm one of the very few people in the past 25 years who have played this mode, but I decided that I wanted to check it out when I noticed that several of the old reviews I was reading while doing research for this video, the same reviews that essentially said the game was utter garbage, had some praise for this PvP mode. After fiddling around with my setup, I got the mode working and ended up playing a few rounds against both my wife and my brother. The mode relies not only on having 2 controllers, but 2 memory cards with Shadow Tower save data on it. Player 1's profile is pulled from the memory card in slot 1, while Player 2's profile is pulled from the card in slot 2. This is actually a really fun concept. If you knew someone else in 1999 who had also played Shadow Tower, which strains disbelief, I know, but it's a hypothetical, then you could have them bring their memory card over to your house just for the sake of playing this mode. Shadow Tower's PvP mode is called Creature Versus, and it's not a PvP duel mode where you fight your characters against each other like, say, the PvP in the Soulsborne series, as you might expect. Instead, each player puts together a roster of 3 enemies they've encountered in their save file, and instead of the game's normal first-person view, you control these monsters from a third-person Tekken-esque perspective in little fighting game matches. It's not quite every monster available to choose from, but it is the majority of them, including bosses, and even monsters who are completely stationary in the main game. The craziest thing about this mode is the item request feature. Each player can request an item from the other's save file, and those items are then wagered from your real single-player save. I think I'm better than you. If I win, I get your Shadow Tiger Katana, and if you win, you get my Summoner Ring of Fire. Then, when the match is over, the game will actually remove the wagered item from the loser's inventory, overwrite their save, give it to the winner, and overwrite that save too, essentially trading the item between them. Obviously, if you wanted to just give your friend a huge leg up if they were early on in the game, you could also use this as a gifting system if you'd already beaten it. Here, you're struggling with the boss of Earthworld? Have this sword from the end of the game, it'll wreck him. I'll just throw this match so you can have it. It's definitely a mechanic from the era of trading Pokemon, but I can't think of many games that have this sort of system built in even now. They even thought to check that you haven't just copied the same file over to a second memory card to prevent you from duping items. You can still do battles with the same file on 2 cards, but you can't make wagers between them. This mode is legitimately very fun. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's not a lot of mechanical depth here, and there's virtually no attempt at balance. It seems like whichever enemy you pick is scaled exactly to where it would have been encountered in the main game, so realistically there's no reason not to just select 3 endgame bosses to fight for you, but that's only a problem if you're trying to view this mode in a seriously competitive light. There was no world where this mode was going to be taken seriously competitively. It is a fun and silly novelty, and if I'd had this game when I was a kid, my friends and I absolutely would have played this game at sleepovers in between rounds of Smash Bros, Billy Hatcher's Versus mode, or Twisted Metal. It is very fun to be able to manually control the monsters you've been fighting the whole game, and it's very fun to watch those monsters fight each other. This idea of pitting the enemies in a From Software game against each other to see who would win is an entire subgenre of YouTube video now, and here, in 1998, From Software dedicated an entire multiplayer mode to it. If there's any problem I have with it, it's just that the rounds are too short, limited to just 30 seconds with no way to increase that time, which is just barely enough time to even figure out how to control the specific monster you're using in that round. In conclusion, FromSoftware should put this exact mode into Elden Ring. Actually, every game should include this mode. If you're a Shadow Tower fan who's never tried it, see if you can't get a friend to come over to mess around with it for a while. I think you'll have a fun time. It's always interesting to go back to these classic FromSoftware dungeon crawlers in a post-Souls world. Demon Souls and Dark Souls were influential enough that modern gaming reshaped itself around them, and Elden Ring's sales numbers cemented the studio as truly mainstream. My dad asked me about Elden Ring when it came out, and if you'd told me that would happen back when Demon Souls was this relatively obscure masochore novelty, I'm not sure I would have believed you. Famously, Demon Souls, and by extension the entire Soulsborne meta-series, took heavy inspiration from the Kingsfield games, functioning as a spiritual successor to the franchise. There are a lot of things core to the Soulsborne games which started in Kingsfield. The Moonlight Greatsword, Seed the Scaleless, even a reference to the You're Not Kingly door from Kingsfield 4 in Dark Souls 2. Shadow Tower contains a lot of ideas which were later reincorporated into the Soulsborne games. Some of these are relatively surface level. Obviously, you may have picked up on this already, but the idea of killing monsters to absorb souls in order to power yourself up is exactly how the level up mechanic in Demon Souls and the Dark Souls series is contextualized. Another similarity is that the lore notes scrawled on walls in the game bear a striking visual resemblance to the messages left by other players in the Souls games. There are some moments that are specifically called back to in later games as well. In Earthworld, there's a sequence where you encounter large tunneling worms that are the full size of the tunnels containing them, who will slowly move towards you. This is extremely similar to a section in 2.2 of Demon Souls, where you can find large firebugs in the tunnels of Stonefang, which are too wide to be easily bypassed without killing them. While we haven't reached the ending yet, the final boss of Shadow Tower is somewhat similar to the final boss of Demon Souls, True King Elant, in that they are both anti-climax bosses that the player rolls over with virtually no challenge whatsoever. I'll get into what I think the lore of the Demon King at the end of Shadow Tower is a bit later, but suffice to say both are highly corrupted kings who have been influenced by a demonic power so heavily that their bodies have been utterly deformed, leaving them helpless to fight you, with the real final boss in terms of difficulty having been fought earlier. One of the more substantial references to Shadow Tower we see in later FromSoft games has to do with the character Ariel, named Rurufan in the original Japanese release. Ariel is described as a demoness and is one of 2 NPCs in the game with a running quest to find and talk to her repeatedly to get some lore and item rewards. The first time we meet Ariel, she's been defeated, somehow, by the dwarf Durin, who expelled her mind from her body and placed it into a life-sized wooden doll. Her true body is lying in a glass coffin in Durin's lair, and she asks that you kill Durin and free her. Obviously, this idea of a mysterious and powerful female character inhabiting the body of a doll was reused twice in later games by FromSoftware. First with the doll, your level-up lady from Bloodborne, and again with Ranni the Witch in Elden Ring. Ariel's pose in doll form was directly referenced by the doll in Bloodborne, who stands in the exact same way by default. It's actually somewhat easy to miss that Ranni is in the body of a doll if you're not paying attention to her character model, but the form we see her in isn't her true body, and you can see the joints in her arms, especially at the end of her questline when we see her full body. That body and those obvious points of articulation look a lot like Ariel's doll form. Ranni even puts herself into a pocket-sized doll during part of her quest, so she gets all dolled up twice in the same game. Oh, and also, Ariel goes into the Patches squat when you exhaust her dialogue in doll form. Durin actually has some similarities to Patches. When you're exploring the Earthworld's poison area, you'll open a door to find ankle-deep poison on the other side. Durin will run out of a locked door behind you and warn you not to go that way, saying to follow him instead. When you do so, you'll find that he locked his door again and calls you a fool as monsters spawn in behind you. Then, when you make your way around to the back to reach Durin, he'll beg for forgiveness and ask you to spare him. Don't, you need his key in order to free Ariel. I personally also believe that Ariel was the inspiration for the level-up lady archetype in the Soulsborne games. You know, the Maiden in Black, the Emerald Herald, the Doll, the Firekeeper, Emma, and Melina. The level-up lady. Okay, Emma doesn't actually level you up, but only because Sekiro doesn't have character levels. She's still a level up lady in my book. Ariel doesn't serve quite the same role in Shadow Tower, but she's one of only 2 recurring NPCs in the game, the other being Fat Mole. She does give you some important lore and even powerful items a couple of times. The game in FromSoft's later catalog Shadow Tower has the most mechanical similarities to is surprisingly Dark Souls 2. A lot of the features people hated about Dark Souls 2 came straight from Shadow Tower. Not adaptability though. Dark Souls 2 came up with that bad idea all on its own. The enemies in Dark Souls 2 are a finite resource. Each enemy in the game, with a few exceptions, despawns after you kill it 12 times. The enemies in Shadow Tower are also finite, with a limited number of respawns before an area will be left permanently empty. In fact, you know those pigs in Scholar who you can kill 12 times and they're replaced by bigger ones, and then if you kill those 12 times, they're replaced with a giant one? That feels like a specific reference to the enemies I mentioned earlier in Beast World that spawn a giant mini-boss version when their respawns are depleted to get the young dragon gem. I've heard that other enemies in Shadow Tower will also spawn giant mini-boss versions when you kill them all, but I've never noticed that happen in my own games. The emphasis on weapon durability is also a similarity. Dark Souls 2 encouraged the player to always have a backup weapon that they kept equipped and ready to hot swap to at a moment's notice because your weapons were often too fragile to make it from one bonfire to the next without breaking. Even more specific details, like the acid that rapidly degrades your equipment as you run through it from Shadow Tower's water world, forcing you to unequip your items and run through a section naked, was taken almost exactly and placed in several spots of Dark Souls 2, such as Drangleic Castle. Narratively, the idea of kingdoms built on top of failed kingdoms with an original sin beneath it all, that is the plot of Dark Souls 2. Shadow Tower even ends with an implication that all of this is a part of a cycle, that everything in this game has happened before and will happen again, just like Dark Souls 2. Talking about the story of Shadow Tower presents some unique problems. The first is the storytelling style. FromSoftware have always had a very indirect method of storytelling. That's present in games as recent as Elden Ring, and it was present in their very first games with the Kingsfield series. Shadow Tower's story is vague even by those standards, though. Dialogue and context for what you're doing is scarce. It's easy to beat the game with the takeaway that it didn't even have a story at all, but while I don't think there's as much story and lore here as its sister series, Kingsfield, there is some stuff worth talking about and worth trying to interpret. The problem is, all of this vagueness is compounded by the fact that the English version of this game is... Well, okay, let's start here. Every world except for the human world has a boss ruling over it. The first of these bosses is Apollos, who describes himself as the first of the 7 knights of King Edward, who led an expedition into the Shadow Tower in search of the One-Eyed Crown. But there's a problem with this understanding of events, the problem of King Kells. See, all of the references to this doomed expedition into the tower are consistently talking about King Edward except for one. In the Earth world, there's a soldier who is being crushed by a boulder, and you have to insert a sword into a slot in the wall nearby to disarm the trap and free him. This soldier, this one soldier, says he's here as a part of King Kells' expedition, not King Edward's. King Kells is never mentioned again. That prologue I read earlier says that the tower is guarded by the kings of surrounding nations, so you could assume that King Kells is just another one of these kings watching over the tower, but it is very strange that there's this single reference to Kells' expedition that never comes up again. You might have already guessed what's going on here. Shadow Tower comes from an era where localizers were given a lot of freedom to not only change names and implications, but entire story threads if they thought it was necessary to streamline a story in a way that would be more palatable to a Western audience. It turns out, rewriting a story in the process of translating it is exactly as bad of an idea as it sounds on paper, and this has historically led to a lot of problems with understanding localized stories on close inspection. The Kingsfield games were changed pretty significantly in this way, but Shadow Tower seems to have been hit even harder. There are other easier to catch inconsistencies too. For example, I don't know if you caught it earlier, but the opening text crawl refers to the land that was swallowed up as Zepta, while the prologue I read out in the manual calls it Zepter. If you're familiar with Japanese at all, it's easy to see how the same proper noun could be translated to either of those, but translating it as both is pretty sloppy. Not to be too hard on whoever was doing the thankless task of translating this game no one was going to play into English 26 years ago, I am very sympathetic to their plight. I'm going to try my best to explain what I think the story of this game actually is, but understand that this is a major roadblock that might influence my reading of it. I've done what research I can on what exactly was changed in translation, but Shadow Tower is still a relatively obscure game, so there's not a massive body of work about it like there is with, say, Elden Ring about the changes made during its translation. If there are errors in my understanding of the game due to these issues with the translation, please let me know in the comments. I'd be very interested in hearing what they are. According to the most reliable source of information on the internet, some guy leaving a comment on Reddit, the Japanese version of the game actually refers to 3 different kings: King Kells, King Rude, and King Philip, who are the kings referenced in the manual as guarding the tower. The English translation attempted to streamline the story by combining all 3 kings into one character, King Edward, but still left the reference to multiple kings in the manual, and accidentally left one reference to King Kells in the game. I'm going to keep referring to King Edward throughout the rest of this video because that is the version of the game I played, but we should keep this in mind. So, let's talk about what I think the story of Shadow Tower is. At the beginning of the game, we are told there was an ancient king of a land called Eclipse who conquered the entire continent with the power of a one-eyed crown. I'm going to tell you now because it's really obvious. The one-eyed crown is the vessel of a demon. One night, the one-eyed crown swallowed up the entire kingdom and it vanished overnight. Now, in the present day, the crown is sealed within a massive tower, the Shadow Tower. The Shadow Tower is protected by kings of various nearby nations to prevent would-be treasure hunters from taking the crown's power for themselves so that history would not repeat itself. One of these kings, called King Edward in our English version, betrayed the other nations guarding the crown and led an expedition into the tower in search of it so that he could use its power to conquer the world himself. There are, however, still other kings actively trying to protect the crown, although references to them were confusingly combined into all being references to King Edward in the English version. One day, the Shadow Tower awakens and swallows up the surrounding town/region of Zepta or Zepter, and the souls of all those in the area were stolen by the monsters within the tower. The tower itself sunk into the earth, leaving a crater where Zepter once was, and only the top floors of the tower are accessible. We play as Roose Hardy, a mercenary who was returning home when he found the aftermath of this. Learning that the power of the one-eyed crown could revive everyone whose souls were taken, he descends into the tower in search of it. Throughout the game, we must defeat 6 rulers of the worlds within it: Apollos in the Earth world, the Ebony Knight in the Fire world, Magi Magus in the Water world, the strange being called Disguise in the Illusion world, the Demon Lord Necron in the Monster world, and finally, the Hollow Mage in the depths of the Death world. The void at the bottom of the tower is sealed by these rulers, and defeating each of them undoes one of the seals. Along the way, we end up being aided by a mysterious creature called Fat Mole, and are given more information and even a high-value soul pod by the demoness Ariel, who asks if we're prepared to fight her near the end of the game, but that never actually happens. When we undo all of the seals, we enter the Void, a space in the very depths of the tower, which looks like it was once some sort of ancient city. Here, we fight the final guardian of the crown, an armored knight called Balron, who is recognizably the knight, or at least the armor, we see in the game's opening CG cutscene. Halfway through the fight, Balron's armor falls off, revealing that he's a dinosaur. It's great, I love this game. Balron is really the final boss of the game. Once he's down, we're attacked by the Demon King in control of the tower, who says we have to die because we're allies with Fat Mole, but as soon as we attack him, he starts screaming about the pain and quickly dies. Once the Demon King dies, he leaves the one-eyed crown behind. In a final cutscene, Roos picks the crown up, and a mysterious figure of light, which I believe is the demon contained within the crown, asks why he has come for the crown, and says that it has the power to grant any wish. This is where we're hit with the final twist of the story. Rather than using the crown's power to resurrect all of the souls he's absorbed along the journey, Roos uses the crown for personal gain in the same way the ancient king of Eclipse did. We're greeted with a final cutscene that looks triumphant as Roos has become a mighty conqueror and emperor of the continent, and the game zooms in on the crown. Turns out we've been playing as Griffith the entire time, and we're just fine with sacrificing thousands of souls in the name of our own lust for power. If you haven't pieced the story together by the time you reach this ending, and I couldn't blame you if that's the case, then it's easy to mistake this for a happy ending. The term conqueror has negative connotations, certainly, but your main character completing their mission and becoming the king is the most classic RPG ending there is. Of course, if we understand what exactly Roos has done and what he's sacrificing, the bright and triumphant final moments are far darker, and the one-eyed crown being freed from the Shadow Tower is very bad news for the future of the continent of Eclipse. History is repeating itself after all. Roos's kingdom will one day also fall, the crown will be sealed away again, and the cycle will begin anew. Shadow Tower is a story-light game, but I actually really like this ending. Seeing an RPG that deconstructs a classic ending trope and does so subtly through implication in what looks like a triumphant ending, trusting that the player will understand the darker implications without someone directly looking at the camera and saying, actually, this is a bad ending, is surprisingly nuanced for a dungeon crawler from 1998. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it's super deep, but I wasn't looking for depth. It's a compelling ending, and that's more than enough. That's it for what I feel comfortable calling the direct story of Shadow Tower, the concrete information presented. However, if you'll step into my office and put this tinfoil hat on, I have some theories for you. Like all of FromSoftware's games, there's more to piece together here if we look a little closer. That ending, the concrete information presented to you, still leaves a few loose ends that might be gnawing at you when you put the game down. The biggest one being, and I'm not joking here, what's Fat Mole's whole deal? Like, he's the most solid bro in the game, but he seems like he would be a joke character, and then in the final moments of the game, the Demon King in the depths of the tower identifies him as some sort of rival. It always seems like there's more going on with him. Well, I'm going to tell you what I think Fat Mole's deal is, but we're going to need to take a bit of a walk to get there. In the post-game, if we reload our clear data after the credits, we get a bestiary entry for the Demon King, which reads, "The source of all evil in the tower. He controls all of the demons and monsters which he created." Now, the interesting thing about this is that the icon for the Demon King bestiary entry doesn't show the monster we fought at the end of the game. Rather, it shows the model of the one-eyed crown. Given that every other bestiary entry shows the corresponding monster, that feels deliberate, but what does it mean? Do we interpret it as saying the one-eyed crown was the one in control the whole time? I don't think that actually makes a lot of sense. Given the ending of the game, the demon within the one-eyed crown seems to want to escape the tower to spread chaos out in the world at large. Personally, here's what I think is going on, and we are getting into speculation territory here, so take this with a grain of salt, especially since I'm working with the imperfect English version of the game. I think that the Demon King we fight as the trivial final boss at the end of the game is one of the other kings who was dedicated to keeping the demon within the one-eyed crown contained. When Edward sought the crown to take its power for himself, whoever this is got to it first in order to keep it out of Edward's control, which may have been the inciting incident that activated the tower, or may have happened long ago. In our second dialogue with Ariel's true form in Monster World, she says that the worlds themselves are reflections of the heart of Belial, which I take to be the name of the demon within the crown. Between that and the description of the Demon King being in control of all the monsters within the town, I take it to mean that whoever holds the crown is in control of the tower. If the one in control of the crown now stayed true to their purpose, protecting the tower from interlopers who would seek to use the crown's power for selfish reasons and would bring an apocalypse out into the world, then that explains why everything is trying to keep you away, guarding the crown from invaders. If all of the monsters in the tower were created by the power of the crown, then it follows that the rulers of the worlds are also extensions of the crown. That makes some sense because they are all trying to keep you from reaching the crown. The problem with that is we know for a fact that Apollos, the ruler of Earthworld, is a knight from King Edward's expedition. He is not wholly a creation of the tower, he's just afflicted with some sort of demonic corruption that is warping his flesh, taking control of his body. There's a message on a wall in the human world which implies that the knights from King Edward's expedition, including Apollos, suddenly turned on each other when they started to fall to the tower's corruption. King Edward is similarly warped, with his flesh now being completely removed from his body and being weaved into the tower itself, his large heart beating, and many eyes dangling from the ceiling and watching over it. The tower is an eldritch location that gradually transforms those within it, breaking them apart and making them a part of the tower. Another interesting detail is that different layers of the tower are referred to by messages placed throughout as body parts. A plaque near an obelisk in the Earthworld's False Pit area refers to the region as the Earth's Bowels. One at the entrance of Waterworld's Impure Pools area refers to it as the River of the Harsh Heart, and a plaque in the Monster World's False Eye area says that you are entering the Eldritch Womb, and says that all of the monsters are born of the Dark One, implying that this is where all of the monsters that are filtering into the other areas of the tower originated. So what exactly is going on here? Well, if we take all of this together, Ariel's statements about the worlds being representations of Belial, the way King Edward's flesh is being warped and absorbed into the stonework itself, the way that all of the creatures within it are said to be extensions of the Demon King, the way that the worlds are described as organs of a body, I believe there's some evidence that the demon is not the crown, it's the Shadow Tower itself. The Shadow Tower is the body of the demon, and the monsters running through it are like white blood cells trying to fight off the hostile pathogen that is Roos, and other adventurers seeking the crown. Humans who have been within the tower for a long time, like Apollos or King Edward, are in the process of being digested, of being broken down and incorporated as a part of the tower itself. King Edward is further gone than Apollos is, his flesh has started to fuse with the tower itself, but both are on the same path to truly becoming nothing more than an extension of the tower. Remember those words at the beginning of the game that Roos questions the meaning of? Darkness swallowed all and closed a gate? Well, that's what the Shadow Tower did. It ate the town of Zepter and is now digesting them. Their component parts, their nutritious souls, have been redistributed as energy to different systems and parts of the body. Even the gloopy form of the final Demon King boss we fight at the end of the game could be seen as someone in this process of digestion, of becoming a part of the tower. You can choose how literally you want to interpret this, whether the tower simply acts as a single organism, a hive mind under the control of the Demon King, or if it literally is a single organism. Whichever interpretation you choose to believe, the end result is the same. The entire tower reflects a single will, but I don't think it's the will of the demon. I think it's the will of whoever is holding the crown. Right now, the Demon King we fight at the end of the game only wants to let the crown rot in the depths forever and keep the danger contained within. That's why the army of monsters within the tower doesn't just march out across the world and destroy it. That's why the Demon King isn't using that power to conquer Eclipse. So what does this mean for our buddy Fat Mole? Well, here's my theory. I think that, like Sauron's soul in the One Ring, the demon within the One-Eyed Crown wants to be freed and is exerting some amount of control over the tower itself, even if full control is in the hands of whoever holds the crown. I think that the One-Eyed Crown has exerted enough control over the tower to birth a little, harmless creature like Fat Mole in the same way the other monsters of the tower are born in the monster world, specifically for the purpose of guiding you to the bottom of the tower. This is why, as goofy as Fat Mole seems, it always feels like there's something more going on with him. In Fat Mole's last appearance, just before King Edward, he is cackling and telling you to go ahead and kill them all.
Oh, you're not finished yet? Oh, hurry up and kill them all!
Which is ominous, to say the least. At this point, the demon within the crown knows it's got you on the hook and just needs to finish reeling you in, and can see this absurd gambit actually might pay off. Fat Mole is in the form that he's in specifically because the demon within the one-eyed crown wanted you to trust it, and you're a lot more likely to trust an affable, goofy mole than you are some sort of powerful monster. The Demon King final boss refers to you as being allied with that vile rodent, and I think this is why. He knows that you are being helped along the way by the mole, and he knows that it's the crown's influence manipulating you into setting it free and one day destroying the world. Even the form the demon in the crown appears to you in at the end of the game, an angelic white light, is classic demonic trickery. It appears angelic so that you'll trust what it tells you, and leads you straight to hell. And, in the end, you fall for it, hook, line, and sinker, and lead the whole world to ruin. You might think I'm reading too much into this story, reading too much into these details, and that's fine. Maybe I am. Shadow Tower is a relatively narrative-light game, and I have certainly had to make some leaps in logic to piece this version of the story together. At the very least, I am satisfied with this interpretation of the game, personally, and I think it is decently well supported by the text of the game. Maybe it is just a headcanon, but it's my headcanon, and it's only made the game more satisfying to me as I've settled on it. And that is Shadow Tower. It's a game I love a lot, and I hope that even if you don't want to play it yourself, you at least understand why I love it now that you've finished this video. In a lot of ways, it's the jankiest and worst of FromSoftware's classics, but in others, it is their strangest, silliest, and most captivating. I don't know that I recommend it exactly, because without knowing your taste specifically, it's hard to recommend, but I know that I enjoy it in spite of the problems it has. For the right person, if the things that are bad about it aren't a deal breaker, it might just end up being a new favorite. For most, though, I can understand why you'd view it as a one-off mistake that you never want to play. But here's the thing. Shadow Tower isn't a one-off. We're not done yet. There's a sequel, one that fixes so many of Shadow Tower's problems that I think you should absolutely play it. 5 years after the release of Shadow Tower in 2003, a sequel was released called Shadow Tower Abyss. Shadow Tower Abyss was never released outside of Japan, but a fan translation did make its way online in 2011. Next time, we're going to take a look at the game that took all of Shadow Tower's strangest and boldest ideas and tried to refine them for the sequel, Shadow Tower Abyss. We're going to see a stranger version of the tower, get an idea of how many worlds the tower has brought to ruin, and maybe even figure out what Ariel's whole deal is. Stay tuned. Thank you for making it this far into the video. If you liked it and want to see the follow-up about Shadow Tower Abyss, please remember to subscribe, and if you don't mind, leave a like and a comment while you're at it. It makes a big difference. I also wanted to let people know that I recently announced a new stretch goal for my Patreon and YouTube channel memberships, where I'm going to cover the games Pathologic and Pathologic 2 when I reach $300 a month in direct support. About halfway there at the time of writing, so if you like the channel and want to see those games covered, every little bit helps. I've also recently restructured my Patreon with a new $2 a month tier that provides access to exclusive videos, update posts, and gets your name in text at the end of videos. $5 a month members now also receive 1 week of early access to all videos on the channel. If you liked this video, I want to point you to another piece of content about Shadow Tower from a few years back at this point, the podcast Bonfireside Chat, which has covered all of the Souls games in close detail, and covered Shadow Tower and Shadow Tower Abyss back in the lead up to Dark Souls 3 being released. I listened to those podcasts back in the day, and they're how I ended up getting into Shadow Tower and the Kingsfield games, so go give them a listen. I re-listened to their coverage of both games after finishing this script, and we ended up hitting a lot of the same points, which makes sense as they're the way I got into the game, so I wanted to point people their way. I also want to give a special thank you to my fellow YouTuber Polymacho for reading that quote at the beginning of the video. You guys should go check out his channel. He recently put out a video about Dragon Age 2 that I really enjoyed, so go give that a look if you're looking for something to watch. Finally, thank you to my Patreon supporters and YouTube channel members for helping me keep making content here. Pizza Requiem. Panosny Koriznik. Rules in Place. Mari SQZ. Raxarox. Mikaru X. Unhealthy Caillou. Sir Darkon. Rachel Aurelia. Devale. Mouse V. Maxine. Lieria. Theodore Divini. Noah Phoenix. The Smallest Church in Wienerville. Gassan Abanura. Patrizia Frabetti. Sninkelberg. Ziggy the 31st. Frondi. Yo-Yo Jojo Mojo. Tsai Voafehi. Dan Luther. Still Just Cow. Jose Armalas. William. Cabbage. Rekka. Alex Smith. Picayune. Hakan Boyam. Pete Lee. Shiny Emptyhead. That's All. Bell Mage. And Malachi Murphy. Until next time, everyone, take care.